In order to protect a ship hull from explosive charges of mines and torpedoes, it is necessary to have a crushable space between an inner hull and an outer hull. The crushable space needs to remain elastic up to a point which allows for the ship to operate in the ocean. So waves and storms will not cause the hull to deflect, but above a certain value, the material needs to crush and absorb energy. With the use of viscoplasticity, it takes time for the material to be crushed, and that time allows for the peak pressure of the explosion to pass without damaging the inner hull. One way of doing this is with a cup and a cap. The cup can be forged and an indentation formed around the circumference of the cup. A cap can also be forged, and the cap can be welded onto the cup. At the center of both the cup and the cap, there might be a hole. And the reason for that is you want it to be somewhat weakened. You want the entire structure to be crushed, to yield under a high enough force without the force being too high to damage the inner hull. Those holes could be filled with some plastic. The purpose of the indentation is to cause a stress concentration. The stress will be higher around that indentation, and that will make the material yield. And that yielding will give a more uniform crushing of the entire object. The other reason for the indentation is allows for the use of a thick piece of plastic with holes in it. And the cup structure can be pushed through the plastic, and the holes hold them together so that a sheet of the cup structures can be formed. An additional sheet can be formed faced in the opposite direction to make a sandwich layer. Several of these sandwich layers can then be formed to form the crushable space. All of the layers could be joined by plastic ties that reach from one face to the other. In between the cups, foam rubber could be injected. This entire structure is somewhat flexible, making it easier to install between the inner and outer hulls. Between both the inner and outer hulls in the sandwich structure, it might be useful to inject some kind of material to hold them in place and make the entire structure fairly uniform. The purpose of the foam rubber is that if the outer hull is breached, the entire space will not flood. The foam rubber will limit how far seawater penetrates throughout the structure. This entire system, or a system similar to it, could have been built as early as World War II. So for 80 years, the Navy has had the wrong ship hulls. It does add weight. On an Arleigh Burke destroyer, which weighs something like 8,000 tons fully loaded, it might weigh as much as 1,000 tons. But that means the destroyer is then protected against mines, torpedoes, drone boats, suicide boats. It is pointless to contact the US Navy unless you meet somebody at a cocktail party. They will ignore you. Not only will the US Navy ignore you, so will the rest of the US government. There is the Government Accountability Office, which is supposed to make sure that failures are corrected in the government. They recently wrote a report on what is known as the Constellation-class frigates. The Navy is building a ship smaller than the Arleigh Burke destroyers. The original plan was that they brought in an Italian company to build the same type of frigate that they were building for the Italian Navy. They would build the entire hull, they would add American equipment to it. It was then decided to completely redesign the ship, which made the original contract pointless. The Government Accountability Office wrote a report saying that the project is over budget and behind schedule. If you contact them, which I did, they will just ignore you. The fact is not that the Constellation-class frigates are a failed design, it's that all Navy ship hull designs are failed designs, and they are not interested in knowing that. So they passed it off to the Inspector General of the U.S. Department of Defense. The U.S. Department of Defense says that, one, there is no need to contact them again on this matter, and that they can't find anything to investigate. The entire Navy being obsolete and having the wrong ship hulls is not something that they investigate. They are not interested. It's a pretty amazing situation.